Welcome to Fridays with Vistage. My name is Bill Black. I am a Vistage member and your moderator today. The session title for today is External Forces Affecting Your Business, Identifying and Combating Them for Growth. In this session, we'll explore the 5 critical external forces that affect your business growth and what you can and should do to win. We'll also review some critical examples of businesses that overcame them and what they did to achieve success. Today's speaker is Sean Klunder. He is the Partner and Chief Marketing Officer at Chief Outsiders. He works as a contracted CMO for small and mid-sized companies looking for explosive growth. Mr. Klunder has held several executive-level product management and marketing positions at large organizations, most recently as Senior Vice President, Product Management and Marketing at Korn Ferry and Vice President, Marketing and Digital Development at World Book. He's also an expert digital marketer and an adjunct professor of digital marketing at the Lake Forest Graduate School of Management in the Chicago area. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Klunder.
Thank you very much, Bill, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today, and happy Friday, everybody. As you can see on your screen, I titled this session, What's Holding Your Business Back? And the external factors that stall growth and how to combat them. And just a quick overview, basically this presentation is really a collection of what I've seen out there and companies that I've worked directly with, of what are the top factors that we see that holds businesses back. And I'll intercede some actual case study examples of work that I've done, and I've protected, obviously, the names of the organization. But you'll see some real data here of some things that we have done at Chief Outsiders, and also me personally working with organizations to identify external factors that stall growth and what we can do to combat them. So this is a good example of if this is a revenue chart and we see dips in it. And a lot of times CEOs will come to us and ask, why is this happening? Why do we see dips in our revenue? We might see it go up and come back down, or in some instances, we may see that businesses, their revenue is stalled. It hasn't been increasing. And we want to answer the question as to what causes those stalls in growth. Now, these are pretty typical responses, and maybe you could identify with some of these. Normally, when I ask the question, well, why do you think that's happening? A lot of the responses are more internally focused. My salespeople, they're not aggressive enough. We don't have enough leads from marketing. We have the wrong people within the organization. My marketing and sales teams are not aligned, something that we hear a lot of. We're not selling to new customers. All we're doing is focusing on existing customers. We're not good at closing deals, or maybe we should be discounting our prices more. And most of these responses and reactions are internally focused. And in many cases, what we see out there are external things that we weren't aware of that are causing the business to stall in growth. And those will be the 5 things that we'll look at closely today. But I wanted to start with a quick polling question out there. The question is, do you have a system to identify and monitor external factors that affect your business? And choose one of the 4 responses. The first 2 are yes. The first one is yes, it's working very well. Yes, but I'd like to improve it. Or the last 2 responses are no, but I do want to create a system. And no, I don't need a system to monitor external factors that could be affecting my business. So if you wouldn't mind, take a minute or so and think about that in response. And then we'll look at the responses here in about a half a minute or so. All right, so let's jump right in. One of the things that I like to say to companies is you don't want to get caught in a storm that you didn't see coming. And this really speaks to you don't want to be caught off guard. And once you're in the middle of a storm, it's very difficult to navigate out of it. If you can see the storm coming, it's difficult to put processes and strategies in place to avoid being in the middle of the storm. So using the same weather analogy, I'd like to talk about using your business radar to monitor the external environment. If we can see where the storm is at, we can better prepare ourselves. And then the final step in that is we want to be able to make predictions of what's happening. Because if you could see what's coming, you can be ready for it. So let's avoid being caught in the middle of the storm. Let's use our business radar to see where the storm is, and then also predict where the market might be going, where your competitors might be headed based upon some of the data. Are we pricing ourselves appropriately? What are the external factors and where are they going so we can properly prepare ourselves today for any changes that we'd want to make within our business itself? So let's talk a little bit about running versus growing a company. And this is data that we have internally at Chief Outsiders, that most companies that are run very well have a very difficult time growing. And there's two really distinct differences as to why that's true. And CEOs, there are some CEOs, heads of organizations that are very good at running a company, which is optimizing inside the four walls. You're making sure you're efficient, your cost structures are good, your profitability is good. You focus a lot of attention inside the four walls of the organization. But growing a company involves aligning yourself to the outside, looking beyond the four walls of your organization to see what might be coming your direction. How are you compared to your competition? What are some external forces out there that are positive or potentially could be negative for your organization in terms of being able to grow it? So looking outward is really important. It's equally as important as looking inward. But again, many companies that are really well run have a difficult time growing because they don't have a good, solid process for monitoring outside the four walls of the organization in the external environment. So these are the 5 external factors that I have seen in working with CEOs and companies as to the major ones, and there's a lot of others, but the major ones that we see that are really affecting stalled growth in an organization. One is some sort of a change or an increase in the competitive landscape, and then how do we set your business apart so that you're not operating in the same red ocean as all the other competitors. The other one is disruptive and sustainable innovations. And we live in a world now where technology speeds us up pretty quickly, and we're seeing a lot of organizations out there who are continuously innovating and thus really causing major shifts in the marketplace. So we'll talk about disruptive and sustainable innovations and how what's a process that you could put in place to be a disruptor. The third is product and service substitutions. And I have a slightly different definition of what a substitute product is than what the textbook definition is based upon the work that I've done. But we'll talk a little bit about what exactly is a product or a service substitution and how do you separate yourself from it. The fourth is pricing pressures. Most organizations price their products based upon a cost-based structure. Well, how do you price your offerings based upon value? How can you increase your prices to show value rather than just compete based upon your cost structure or compete directly by saying our unique value proposition is a lower price? And the fifth, I'll spend just a little tiny bit of time on this one, is economic. We all know that the economic conditions outside of our organizations could really affect our growth. And what's a way that you can monitor and forecast economic conditions and to better prepare yourself for what might be coming? So we'll spend a little bit of time. There's one slide I have on this one that I'm going to recommend a service that you could use. And it looks like the polling questions are in, and most people, everybody responded by saying, we don't have a process for monitoring the external market, but we need one. And that's pretty typical out there. That a lot of organizations that we see and work with really don't have a process for looking outside of the four walls of the organization and putting a good process in place. So my hope is at the end of this presentation that you'll have some great takeaways that you can go right back into your companies and start to implement processes around each of these 5 different areas of external factors that we see as the majority of threats to businesses. Okay, let's start by talking about the competitive landscape, setting your business apart. This is really critical. We see on many cases competitors increase or decrease or change positions, but monitoring that is really important. One of the first things that I want to talk about here is some interesting data that I've uncovered, which shows the percent of companies that fall out of the top 3 rankings in their industry. And this is over a 3-year period. And you can see that in 1960, which was a while ago, a very low percentage of companies fell out of the top rankings within their industry, but that's continuously growing. And even this data is dated back to 2008, which we know is about 8 or 9 years old now, had rapidly increased. So there's a tremendous amount of movement that's occurring out there and fast competitive threats that are occurring that are knocking top businesses out of their rankings within the industries itself. So what does the competitive environment analysis look like? Now, one thing I want to mention is that there's no cookie cutter approach that I take when working with CEOs and companies, because every organization is different. All the offerings are different. The markets are different. I try to craft different approaches for every single organization. So I'm going to try to generalize this in a bit with 5 basic steps that you could take. One, obviously, is to identify, and I'll go through these in detail. The first step, obviously, is to identify who your competitors are. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. The next is, well, somehow you have to characterize them. We have to classify them somehow, not just their company, but their offerings. And then the third is, how do we compare to that? How are we aligned to the competitive landscape? Using all of that information, what strategies will we put in place to combat what we're seeing out there? And then the most important step here is, how are we going to execute on that? So these 5 general steps will take a little bit of time to talk through: identify, characterize, align, strategize, and then execute. The first thing that's really important, and I see this a lot, even with organizations, that when I ask the question, tell me who your competitors are, 9 times out of 10, the list that I receive is direct competition, which are companies that are doing really the same thing that you're doing. But in many cases, we're not looking at, and we should be looking at, indirect competition, because they have as much effect on your business as direct competitors do as well. And I know it's a very simple example, McDonald's versus Burger King versus McDonald's versus Pizza Hut, but in this instance here, an indirect competitor also could influence the buying patterns of your organization and your offerings. So we have to look at both. Now, you may be asking the question, well, how do I identify who they are? One of the things that I like to do, very simple, is simply just to survey customers and non-customers. Find out what they're using. And based upon what they're using, you can divide out the competitive landscape by direct and indirect competition. But this is a really important step in the identification process, is not to forget about who your indirect competition is, but also your direct competition. So during step 2, the characterization, I put this, I'll call it a mathematical formula in place here, because I don't want to forget that a competitive analysis is really 2 broad areas. One is your offerings. What are you selling? What are your products or your services, and how are they comparing to the organization, but to the competitors, plus the channels. And let me define what channels is from my perspective. Channels really represents what are the marketing channels, how are they going to market with their offerings, and how is that comparing to us? In many cases, we could say we can pat ourselves on the back, and we have when working with a lot of organizations that, yep, we really are competitively different, but we're still not growing, or our growth is stalled. Why is that? And it could be because the marketing and the sales channels that are being utilized by the competitors are much better and far beyond that. They've identified channels that they're using that's knocking us out of a top position in our market. So a competitive analysis represents both comparing your company from an offering standpoint, but also looking at their go-to-market strategies and their channels from marketing to sales, and how that basically comprises a competitive analysis. And I'm going to show you on some next slides some actual data that I have pulled, and I've simplified this for the purpose of this presentation, but to show you some examples of some of the data that we pulled in working with companies. So in this instance here, doing market research, a lot of companies think it's expensive to do, and it's really not. By simply, in this instance here, surveying your market to understand what are the characters or the classifications of an offering, a product of ours that we really should be focusing on. And I've got two slides here that I want to distinguish. This one's called market ratings, and I like to do a ratings approach, but also a ranking approach. So if there's a note that you want to write down here, when you're surveying your customers and you want to understand out of all the different features that a product has or benefits that a product may have an offering, I want to ask my customers and non-customers to rate, but to also rank those for me. And why that's important is because I want to be able to see, one, how important is a feature of an individual product, but also, two, how would you rank them when you compare them side by side? So this is an example of a survey that we had done with the customer base and non-customer base, where I carved out the 6 most important top features. And then the next slide is also the rankings. Now, what was really important here is when you compare the ratings and the rankings, sometimes you'll notice some outliers that it's important to have, but it's not ranked as high as some of the other features there. So that's a really important step in looking at what's really important to your customer base. Once we have that information, we can take that a step further. Now, many times we see, well, we all have a simplified registration process, but what does that really mean? And how do we stack up against a competitor? So the third step, and this is, I know it's a detailed slide here that can be a little challenging to look at, but I'll just sort of summarize this, where we put ourselves in one column and then all the other competitors in columns to the right of that. The far left column are all of the individual features of, we'll call it one individual product. In this case, it was one individual product that we wanted to compare. Then, once we have that information and we know, well, all the competitors have the very first key feature, but how strong are those features within each of the individual offerings? And literally ask the market for that feedback. They may, all of us may have a very similar feature. However, we may be the strongest or we may be the weakest, or all the other competitors might be weak. Then when you look here at overall and you see the different blue bar graphs, it's also equally important to take a look at the white space in there. So what competitors actually don't have certain key features that we do, and how important are those features? In many cases, this will cause a shift in how we communicate about our product. We may have a very strong product in the marketplace, but how we've positioned it from a sales and a marketing standpoint may need to change based upon the competitive analysis that we've done. All right, the next step, as I mentioned in my mathematical formula, is to take a look at the channels that are being utilized. And again, this is actual data that I did work with an organization to show, let's just look at website traffic. Which companies are generating the most amount of website traffic? And that data is readily available to us through various digital marketing tools. And Bill had mentioned at the beginning of the call, one of my passions is digital marketing, since I also teach that at a graduate school. And it's a great source of information that we could take a look at every other competitor's websites to see, what's generating the most amount of traffic? We could even dissect that by web page. So if we want to get specific on a product by product or service by service or whatever offering it is, we can compare different website traffic. And in this instance here, we noticed and were surprised that the company that we were working with actually had the second to the last lowest website traffic, and most other competitors were directly beating them. Now, the next part of this is, well, where did the traffic come from? Which would give us a sense of what marketing channels are working very well for that organization that maybe we're not even using. So taking a step back, we may have a very strong product offering and it's very competitive, and we don't necessarily need at this point to reinvest in any R&D, but we're not communicating about the product properly in terms of its unique value proposition. And also, are they utilizing channels that we're not utilizing? So we could, from a digital marketing standpoint, we could actually also dissect where's the traffic coming from their website. And in this particular instance, we noticed that social channels were really driving a tremendous amount of traffic through earned media. So they're heavily investing in posting on social media channels, linking to blogs on their website, driving traffic through an earned media perspective that the company that we were working with wasn't really doing any of this, and learned that there was a large audience online that competitors were talking to on a regular basis, but we weren't talking to them. And we also took this a step further as well and dissected it by social channel and the actual content marketing strategy that was being used. But also, too, we found out that a quarter of the web traffic was being generated by paid advertising, and paid advertising generally through Google. So this is an important step as well as we really start to dissect what are the channels that are being used, what's driving the most amount of traffic to their website, and what are we not doing that the competitors are doing. So I urge you to take a close look at that. There are a lot of tools available out there that you could use to gather this information and then re-strategize based on your organization. So that brings us to strategize, step number 4. And there's a lot of questions in here, and I won't read them all, but because this is being recorded, so you could refer back to this when you want. But when you sit down and you gather the information and all the data out there in the market from your competitors, how do you strategize? So some of the key questions are your offerings, are they feature strong or are they weak? Should your customer targets changed? How are you priced? Are there areas of your offerings that no other competitor can match? And how is your market position different than your competitors, okay? So a lot of these questions are really important to answer here in terms of then being able to strategize what's the direction you want to go. One of them, the second to last one here, is your unique value proposition. And I put the word unmatched in here, and we'll touch upon this a little bit later in the presentation. But a unique value proposition, my recommendation and advice to you all is it unmatched? Is it difficult for a competitor to duplicate? Or tomorrow, could every competitor say the exact same unique value proposition? So that's really important to spend a lot of time to redraft or reconceive what your unique value proposition is in the market based upon the competitive research. Okay, and again, very simple approach. Once you get to the execution stage, I like to look at this as, well, let's start with your customer targets. Who are you targeting out there? Do you need to have a different unique value proposition based upon each individual customer target that you have? And from there, what are the channels that you're gonna promote your product through? What's the messaging that you're going to craft based upon your unique value proposition? What's the pricing strategy? And we'll talk about value-based pricing strategy in a bit, but what's the price strategy, the pricing strategy that you're going to use? And then equally as important, what's the sales process? Is the sales process where we're relying, if you're B2B, on your sales reps basically making initial contacts, or do you need to transform your marketing department to be the lead generation engine for your business, and then your salespeople become closers? So that's really important, is what's the sales process and how does that match up to your marketing channels? So that's on the execution phase. And I want to talk a little bit about a case study, which is somewhat of a recent company that I worked with. It was a software company that offered event management and scheduling software to businesses, to institutions. So this was a B2B company. They were the first to market with their product, and that's hugely advantageous, is to be first to market. But after 5 years, their revenue and their customer base began to decline. And as we did some deeper research into why was that occurring, we noticed two things. One, the market itself hadn't really grown. So in terms of the overall demand for that product, it had pretty much stayed the same. But 8 competitors entered the market, both direct and indirect, over that 5-year period. So we all know what happens then is that the slices of the pie, revenue pie, began to get smaller because demand is not increasing. And also, the organization was the highest priced. Now, I'm not suggesting that the price had to change, but in many cases, it's about justifying the price. But the product itself was very feature-rich, so it was still a very competitive product. The issue is that there were more competitors that entered into the space, causing the slices of the revenue pie to decrease. So what are some of the things that we did? From a positioning standpoint, previously, it was very feature-focused. Here's what the product does. Here are the 10 different key features that the product has. We switched that to a problem solver. What are the pain points in the market that you're trying to resolve for customers? We could still get into the feature-focused discussion, but what are the problems that we solve as leading messages in our position in the marketplace? And the features that we thought internally that were important was not necessarily what the market saw as valuable. So the top 5 features that we were communicating weren't necessarily the most valuable to the external market. So through the surveying process that we did, we were able to identify it really ought to be these 3 or 4 features that we ought to be communicating that are of value out there to the marketplace. The channels that they were utilizing were traditional channels, cataloging, direct mail, maybe some outbound calling. Now, we kept those in place, but we implemented a pretty robust and aggressive digital marketing approach to their campaigning to drive traffic, to increase self-education and awareness of their offerings. And I'll just throw out one stat that's not on a slide in here is if you're a B2B organization, we all probably have seen the stats that, somewhere between 50 and 70% of the sales process is done one-on-one with the customer and whatever you have digitally out there on your website. They're taking themselves through the sales process. So we wanted to be in that space to show real value in utilizing digital channels to drive interest. The price of the product was high. We kept that the same because it was very feature-rich. Now, the targets also was very interesting, is basically we were marketing and selling to small, medium, and large organizations, but the majority of the customers were large customers. So we switched our focus. We said we're spending too much time, money, and effort on small and mid-sized customers. We should go after the bigger players because that's who our product is more valuable to. It's also priced higher. So let's target those larger organizations. And the marketing and the sales process, one was very sales support driven, and we switched that to lead generation. So marketing used to be all about generating sales sheets and providing sales support materials to the sales teams, and we switched that to, no, we need to be a lead generation engine for the sales department in order to increase revenue on these products. So that's a quick case study that I thought was helpful, and the name, of course, will remain anonymous, of what we found in terms of data and also what we did in terms of changing the organization and the approach for monitoring competition. Okay, let's move into disruptive innovation here. And we've all heard this term, and there's a lot of different textbook definitions of disruptive innovation. And how can you become the disruptor rather than the disrupted? And the key word here is innovation. and I'm sure many of you in your organizations are constantly looking for how do we continuously innovate? And there's two general categories of innovation. Disruptive innovation, and I have examples of some real disruptive and sustainable innovations that we can talk through. But disruptive innovation is, in a sense, you've created a new market. You have a replacement offering. It shifts behavior out there. Whereas a sustainable innovation is we're continuously innovating within current markets and offerings. So an example might be a sustainable innovation is a product or a service that you currently sell, you market and you sell. You're continuously innovating on that offering to stay ahead of your competition. A disruptive innovation is one that maybe it's a market that you've never been involved in before, but you realize because a core area of expertise, you could enter into another market and completely disrupt it and grow your business in an area that you've never really operated in before. Both of these are really valuable. One is not more valuable than the other, but it's important to distinguish two different types of innovations that we really should be focusing on, both within current markets and offerings, as well as always looking at how can we create new markets with replacement offerings and just completely shift the customer behavior in those areas. So some examples of disruptive innovations. These are going to be no surprise to anybody, but music CDs were completely disrupted by iTunes. Apple, nobody ever thought Apple would get into the music distribution business, but they did and completely disrupted. And I personally haven't bought a music CD in a long time. The other example is cable TV and Netflix. I don't even have cable TV anymore. I basically just use Netflix because on-demand video is completely starting to shift behavior away from cable TV. Photography, film, we all know this with digital cameras. The other one we're seeing is manufacturing is also being disrupted by 3D printing. And that's continuing to grow in popularity, and the technology itself is getting more and more advantageous. Telephone landlines versus cellular phones, local software development that's installed on a device versus cloud technology. And one of my personal favorites is taxis. Uber. Uber completely disrupted the taxi industry. So flip side, sustainable innovation is innovating within a current offering. So iPhone, it recently came out with a new version, which is now waterproof. They've added a new feature. Televisions that are now Wi-Fi enabled. Vacuum cleaners, Dyson came in and said, it's a vacuum cleaner, but I'm going to create something that is much more innovative than what currently exists on the market. Shaving razors, Dollar Shave Club, I use this case study in the class that I teach. Gas power automobiles, Tesla, which is becoming a very popular automobile in their battery technologies. And then also incandescent light bulbs, LED light bulb technology now, which are light bulbs that could last 10 years and cost a fraction of the electricity it takes than compared to an incandescent light bulb. So those are some examples of sustainable innovations versus disruptive innovations. So what's the innovation advantage? And I wanted to pull some real data here that I could show you guys how does this benefit a business. So this first one is really interesting. The time it's taking for a competitor to duplicate or replicate a product of yours, okay, to copy another company's products has decreased from 369 days on average to 266. And I did the math earlier, and that's about a 28-29% reduction of time. So companies are moving faster and faster in being able to replicate your offerings. And then if you are publicly traded, but many of you probably aren't, first movers, okay, so innovators who are moving very quickly and they're first movers out in the market, they enjoy a 36% better stock return. My personal favorite on here is the third bullet point. Companies with high innovation have a 76% product success ratio as compared to 54% with medium or low innovation. So if you're a high innovation company, your success rate goes way up if you've got a good innovation process. And we'll talk about what an innovation process will look like. And then high innovation companies, no surprise, they have better sales from new products. Now, I wanted to also show what's an example here, and that'll be on the next slide, of an organization that has put a new innovation process in place. And this is kind of a scary statistic here before I get into that. 46% of R&D investment is wasted. that's just wasted on new products. That's almost half of R&D investments are wasted on new products that never get off the ground or fail, which means that money is basically thrown away. And I'm sure all of you probably represent a lot of different types of businesses out there. R&D could be very expensive, especially if you're in the technology space. So putting an innovation process in place that's very market-driven is extremely important, and also creating a culture. So let's look at P&G as an example. I'm amazed by the shift that P&G made in terms of an innovation process that really works for their organization. So 16 years ago, 17 years ago, 15% of their products, new products, actually met their revenue and profit goals. 10 years later, after they began installing an innovation process, that number grew to 45%. So 45% of their products actually hit the revenue and profit goals, which is staggering. I mean, that is a very impressive number out there. So the point of this really is that if you have a strong innovation process within your organization, then you will be more financially successful, but you're not wasting as many R&D dollars as well. Okay, so there are two things that I want to talk about here, is the climate, what's your culture for innovation, and the other one I'll talk about is what's a general process that you can put in place. So culture is really important here, the climate of your organization, and me being a lifelong executive marketer, one of the things that I have seen that really destroys great ideas is that if you don't encourage them or you discourage bad ideas, okay? So how do you create this climate? And these are just general thoughts here, but don't ask employees or customers for product ideas. They never know the answer. And my career has always been in managing product management as well as marketing. But instead, what we want to ask is, what problems or frustrations that you have that aren't being solved? And a great example of this is, let's use the iPhone example. Voicemail on the iPhone. When it came out, it was, I don't have to listen to 5 voicemails to listen to the 6th one. I could point and click. That was a major frustration out there that people had. So Apple turned that into let's turn that into a point and click and listen voicemail system. But always ask what problems or frustrations exist out there. We could determine what's the right product or service that we can align that to. But culture is also a top-down approach. It has to start at the top. The innovation, a culture of innovation has to start at the top. So don't ask for it to be created or developed or in a sense, embraced only at the lower and middle levels of the organization. It's got to start at the top. And as I mentioned, don't react to any idea as a bad idea, because in many cases, an idea that might be bad could turn into another thought building on that that's a positive idea. And hold regular innovation sessions, okay? Don't lead it, but facilitate it. You want everybody participating in it. Let's talk about the problems that exist out there. Let's talk about some of the surveys that we've seen and what are some of the key pain points out there. What are some things that we can do? Let's talk about this as a group that we might be able to develop to solve those problems. And that's the kind of conversations you want to have during innovation sessions. But what does an innovation look like? And again, very general, and it looks like some of the translation on the slides didn't come over very well. But first step is innovation. Ask customers what pain points they have, but then move into an ideation phase, as we talked about. Let's brainstorm as a group what ideas we could come up with new products that address those pain points. This next step is research the market. Is there demand out there for it? How much revenue could we actually generate? How much could we sell? From there, concept it. Develop some product concepts. Show them to the market. See if what I developed here actually meets the needs of what your pain points are. The next couple of phases here are much more operational, but let's not forget that we have to financially analyze that offering. Write up a narrative. Here's the market research that we've done. Do some financials. Bring your CFO and your head of finance to do some projections. Here's what it costs. Here's what we're forecasting over 5 years of revenue. Here's how much money we believe we could make. Once that's done, it's a matter of just getting the approval, moving into the development phase, And then on the heels of that, marketing and sales have to start crafting what's our launch approach? How are we going to go to market with this offering here? So again, this looks different for every single organization, but wanted to give you 8 core steps that you can take to implement an innovation process within your organization. So real quickly, from a case study standpoint, one of the companies that I worked with manufactured industrial kitchen vents. Very little differentiation between competitors, but what was really interesting is the problem was most of these vents leaked and corroded. And the problem was not with the product itself, but the product was with the installation by the contractors, so it was installed low quality. Well, the solution was that they developed and trademarked a new joint that was easy and quick to install. So it was a sustainable innovation that they were sitting on that they didn't really understand the value of it, and became a disruptor in the market that led to a price increase. So really good, simple example of the problem was that they leak all the time, and everybody's leaks. But let's create a new joint that avoids the leak. It's easy to install by the contractors. So this was a company that we worked with that we're actually able to charge a premium for that offering. Okay, and I love this image here from a substitute product standpoint. What is a substitute product, okay? And here's a guy who's dressed in a shirt and tie, and instead of mowing his lawn with a lawnmower, he's using a pair of scissors. So how do you identify what a substitute product is, and how could that affect your offering? So it's really important to understand. We talked about competitive landscape, and we talked about direct and indirect competitors. But a third element of this are substitute products. And my definition of this is products or services that a customer could use that's in lieu of your offering. And it could be something that's free. It could be something that they don't have to pay for, okay? And understanding what those substitute products are or could be in your early analysis as part of your external sort of process you put in place is really important to classify. I call them a competitor because they are substitutes. So what I mentioned is that don't just focus on direct and indirect, but think about free or repurposed products. And I'll give you some examples. Watches. We have seen wristwatches significantly decline in sales because smartphones have clocks on them. Bottled water, you don't have to buy water. We all like to, but there's tap water. Automobile is a product there that's very popular, but public transportation could be a substitute product. Televisions, tablets. I watch TV on my tablet all the time now because I have internet-based TV. So I carry my TV with me. It's a portable device called a tablet. And then iTunes, which you buy music from, Pandora is also a potential substitute threat. So these are some examples to help sort of you think through what could be possible substitute products for your organization. So how do you combat that? Well, first and foremost, don't get caught in a price war. The first reaction that organizations seem to have is, well, I'm just going to lower the price of my product because we see some free items that are out there. Focus on how do your offerings make life better, all right? But then also show value rather than cost. And then look at your features that go beyond the substitute products. So you might use something that's free, but the features that I have will completely outperform what as compared to a substitute product. Obviously, include them in your competitive analysis, build your innovation process, but then also talk to customers that are using substitutes. Get their feedback as to why they're using them. And let's use the exact same example of a company that I work with, that event management and scheduling software. We noticed that there were 8 direct and indirect competitors, but event management and scheduling software, the substitute product that was out there that a lot of customers were using, was Google Calendar. And that's free. So we've noticed that there were a lot of customers out there that were non-customers, but they were using a substitute product. So we needed to quickly identify what was the functionality not supported by Google and that was really benefiting customers from a pain point perspective, and then using that as a marketing and a sales message when we were running into customers who were using that substitute product. In this instance here, what we did was we calculated the reduction of staff time and errors using our product versus using Google Calendar. And that data was really important in order to show the real value and the benefit of purchasing a product rather than using a free substitute offering. Okay, let's talk about pricing. I get this a lot. This is a real big trend right now is I want to price my offerings based upon value as opposed to a cost-based. And how do I do that? Well, here's a simple approach that you can take. We all know that there's two approaches to pricing. There's the cost-based approach, and then there's the value-based approach. A lot of organizations still use the cost-based, and you can see by the arrows underneath cost-based, the first thing you do is here's the product, here's the cost, how am I going to mark that up? And on the back side of that is the value and the customers. What you want to do is you want to flip this. You want to think about it, and I'm actually engaged right now in an organization we're changing all their pricing to value-based pricing, which we're focusing on the customers first, the value that we bring, and again, I know this is a very simplified approach, and then generating the price we have on it. So we want to focus on what's the unique value that we bring that is unmatched and very difficult to replicate. How do we translate that into what's the problems that we're solving for you as a customer? And then how are we justifying a price increase based upon that? So it's really flipping it. We want to look at the cost of the product and then make sure that we're profitable, but you first want to focus on customers and the value. Now, not to look too textbooky, but I want you to pay close attention to the gap between the green and the red line. And that's where we want to show value, okay? The larger the gap, the more we can charge, the more value that we're providing through our offerings, the more that we can charge for our products and our services, okay? So, and over time, through your innovation process, you want to continuously think about disruptive or sustainable innovations that could cause you to want to charge more. I use again, let's take the example of the iPhone. The iPhone was launched at a time when the economy was horrible, and cell phones were given away for free if you signed up for a certain carrier. Well, now you could pay up to $1,000 for a smartphone. So the market's been disrupted. There's a tremendous amount of value, and we can charge so much more for a smartphone these days when the market was 10 years ago, phones are free. The value really is in the cell phone service. So the more you could actually attach demand and sustainable innovations and disruptive innovations within your offerings or new offerings, the more you can charge. But in closing out this conversation, I never talk about value-based pricing without talking about value-based marketing and value-based sales. We could identify a price increase and identify the value that we bring. But what's most important is how are you going to market based upon value, and how are you going to sell based upon value? The salespeople generally want to focus on price. They want to lower the price. They want to have freedom to do that. Marketing also the same way. It's a complete shift in how we market and how we sell. And don't forget that value-based pricing goes right along with value-based marketing and value-based selling. And I already talked about this, so I won't spend a lot of time, but the kitchen vent example here, no leaking, 40% less installation time, no training was required by the contract for the contractors, the product life was extended, and we found out customers were willing to pay a 30% premium because we had something new. So a great example of value-based pricing in an area where it was a very price-sensitive market. So I'm hoping that you're seeing as I'm walking through each of these external threats and things that you can do, they all sort of tie together. Innovation is closely tied to value-based pricing and also closely tied to a competitive market analysis. Okay, I'm going to close out here. We're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour of economic trends that affect your business. And this is really important. And a lot of companies out there don't really focus on it. They don't know how to focus on it. But economic trends and understanding how that also aligns to your company and to your offerings and how that might affect it is really important. What's going on out there in your industries? oil and gas, for example, took a significant dip. What's the economic forecast? Many of you have heard or have been to presentations of ITR economics. So this is going to sound like a plug and a pitch for these guys. But ITR Economics is, I think this organization is fantastic, and they offer a number of different services for you that they can take economic trends, overlay that on top of your business, and start to forecast what may or may not happen with your business by looking at your markets closely and looking at different economic factors and statistics here. And one of the things that they're really proud of is they have a 94.7% forecasting accuracy rate. So I heavily encourage all of you, take a look at what these guys have to offer, because it's something that I recommend to a lot of my clients, that let's have ITR come in, take a look at your business, give them some data. They'll marry that up with actual economic data that exists out there, and then help predict or forecast what could happen with your business. And then from there, strategize. How does this change what you offer, what your go-to-market approach is? So I highly recommend to take a close look at that service. Okay, that's an overview, and I know that we could spend probably an hour on each one of those 5 different areas, but I hope that you found that there was some valuable information there that you could use to help your business when looking at the external market, and the 5 factors that I see generally that we see hitting organizations today. So happy to answer any questions. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left.
Sean, excellent job. Fascinating topic, very fascinating, and I think it's something we all need to pay attention to. This would be the time, listeners, to submit your questions via the question section at the bottom of your screen, and we have a few for you, Sean. First one would be, which of the external factors would you see as the most as major threats to companies?
Yeah, great question. So I generally see, which is why I started with it, the competitive environment shifting a lot. And that generally poses a tremendous amount of threats out there. So now within those competitors, we may see sustainable innovations or even disruptive innovations in companies that we've never heard of. But I generally first see that there's a real lack of monitoring the competitive landscape out there and to see what those organizations are up to and how that could affect our business. So that's the number one thing, disruptor that I see out there from an external environment perspective.
Following on that, because this was a question that I thought too, but it came in as, what are the best sources of information for monitoring that competitive landscape?
Yeah, great question. So I like to do customer and non-customer surveying. So that's really critical. We all know, obviously, that we could go onto a company's website, and that's a great source of information, assuming that they're updating their websites on a regular basis. So websites are a good source of information, surveying customers and non-customers, and then also identifying competitors that are out there that you could survey as well. And then also just looking at general industry reports and what's happening out there in terms of demand. So those are the 3 areas that I generally like to use, is customer survey data and non-customer survey data, looking at various industry reports, and basically going online and researching the organizations.
We had another question. You know, we're largely a consumer-based economy, as you know, and are there certain times of year when it's better, if you have an innovative product, to be bringing that out to the consumer base?
Another great question. You know, the timing of it really depends upon your product or your service. You know, if it does, I guess the questions would be, does the product, does it matter, is it affected by time of year in terms of summer, spring, fall? Does the holidays affect that somehow? So it's difficult to generalize an answer to that. Really depends upon what your offerings are. But I will say this, is that once we identify where we're seeing the time of year that the most amount of sales come through, backing up from that is extremely important in terms of when do you start your campaigning, your marketing and your sales activity. If it's a new product or service, months before it's even available or when the sales cycles will actually occur is when we should be focusing on launching that product. So I like to make a distinction between product availability date versus product launch date. And the product launch date in those activities should be well before product availability.
Okay, yeah, and I think the follow-on here was this is like a consumer product. So is it true that, you know, most consumer activity happens around the holiday time, so you're backing up from that is what I'm hearing you say, and your development should be well in advance of that?
Could be, yeah. If products are driven by the holiday season, then that is definitely a time that I would peg and then back up from that to launch and market and sell your products.
Excellent. Okay. Now, who within the organization should be responsible for monitoring this external environment?
Well, that's a really popular question that I get as well. Depending upon who you have in your organization, I always like to point the finger at myself. As being in marketing, it's marketing's responsibility to continuously monitor the external environment and threats. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the only ones involved, but they're leading the charge. And we in marketing are also involving other people, maybe in product management, maybe in R&D, different levels of the executive staff. But the leader of that should be your marketing person who on a regular basis, which might be once a month, it could be every week, depending upon your organization, is continuously out there monitoring what's happening with competitors. Are there pricing issues that we're having? Are there some disruptive or sustainable innovations that we see that are coming? And then reporting that throughout the organization so that we can all together collectively strategize on it. But really the lead should be your marketing department.
Okay, thank you. And another follow-on question from that was that we're a smaller company. Is there a trend like there are in fractional CFOs to fractional CMO types occurring?
The easy answer to that question is absolutely. From our business, we're seeing tremendous demand for a contracted CMO. And there's a few different advantages of that, really. One is that you want to have chief marketing officer, executive level strategic talent within your organization, but you don't need it full time, and you certainly don't want to pay for it full time. Another advantage is that a lot of the organizations that come to us or come to me say, I have a problem that I need to resolve, and my existing marketing function just doesn't have the strategic ability to do it. So we're seeing heavy demand on both come in for 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, and help us solve a certain problem, but also a demand of I just don't want to hire it full time. I want to have somebody that's going to run marketing for us on an ongoing basis, but I don't want to have an employee to do that. So they come to us with that. So demand has been extremely high for a contracted fractional chief marketing officer through Chief Outsiders.
I would imagine. Sean Klunder, thank you so much for a very informative and excellent webinar today.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Just want to remind you listeners that on Friday, November 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, join us for Fridays with Vistage to listen to a webinar on information security and insider's view. Does your company have an information governance strategy? Are you considering it in the future? Join Russ Cohen of Chubb, Bill Harden of Charles River Associates, and Adam Lobb of Stealth Bits to learn how to understand and protect yourself from data breaches. For Vistage Worldwide and Fridays with Vistage, I'm Bill Black. Thank you so much for attending today. Have a great weekend.